So everybody, good morning. Once again, John Graves, instructional designer and project manager here at the Language Resource Center. Today we're going to talk about the Zoom features, specifically whiteboard, hand raising, and polling. And if you're not familiar with the cultural reference from the 80s, this is Ferris Bueller's Day Off. My hope is that my voice does not sound as monotone as his voice does and keeps you nice and awake through the entire webinar. So let's get started. So as we think about going through these tools today, I did want to point this out as in regards to engagement. So the way that faculty engage students and vice versa is going to be slightly different, but not different enough where it's very challenging, but it is an adjustment that faculty are going to have to make. So if we look at the left-hand side where we talk about face-to-face instruction, we see that eye contact, facial expressions, gestures, voice projection, projecting your voice to get students' attention, or whiteboarding and pointing to items on a screen are things that you would do normally in a classroom setting that slightly change as you move over into the online setting or through a solution like Zoom, what we're using today. So you may have to, for example, look into the camera. This is a question I often get. How do I make eye contact with students or look like I'm looking at the students? And so as you can see now, I'm looking down at my laptop screen. So it looks like I'm looking away from you, and it looks like I don't care right now. So, which is probably not what you want to convey to your students. But if I look up, you'll see in a second, if I look up at the camera, you can, or I'm actually looking at the top edge of my screen. I have a large screen here. You'll see that I'm making more eye contact. It looks like I'm engaging the students and asking questions. So understanding what eye contact looks like when you're online is very important. The other piece is, I call it facial expression light, which means that some of the facial expressions that you make, like happy, like I didn't quite understand, could you repeat that? You see how my eyebrows go down, and those types of expressions don't necessarily translate as immediately as they do when you're in a face-to-face situation. So facial expression light will work, but just keep in mind that it may not have the same strong, it may not hit your students in the same way as it does when you're face-to-face. Wide camera angles and gestures light. So many of you may have a close shot of your face in class to show kind of how to articulate a certain sound in the language. In this case, I keep the shot fairly wide because I use my hands a lot to speak. So for example, welcome to today's webinar. I'm your host, John. So if you use your hands a lot and you want to use them as part of your instruction, maybe a wider shot would be good, but just understand it doesn't necessarily have the same effect as it would in a face-to-face classroom where you're going, could you repeat after me, or you're student A, student B, okay, get into let's do the dialogue. So just keep that in mind. It is a little bit different. Whiteboard work, where I was talking about where you're looking at a whiteboard and pointing. Now it's a whiteboard and potentially using your mouse to write sentences on a virtual whiteboard, which I'll show you as part of this presentation. But these are just things I wanted everyone to kind of keep in mind as we go through this presentation. So the other thing I think a quote that I keep in mind as I learn some of these new tools, and I'm learning new tools all the time, is not better, just different, which is to say that it's just these tools are a slightly different way of doing something that you already do well in the face-to-face classroom. So while it may seem daunting for everyone to go into this medium and start working in it, just keep in mind it is slightly different. It'll take a time of adjustment, but it's neither better nor worse. It's just a different way of doing classroom management or instruction in the classroom. So what I'm going to go over first is kind of one of the basic ways that students can interact with, with the faculty that's teaching the course, is through some different expressions. And the reason why they put a lot of web conferencing solutions put these expression tools in is because having someone unmute themselves and speak and potentially creates a situation where people start to speak over one another, and it becomes a vocal train wreck. So having a tool like this where you can virtually raise your hand, and then the instructor can go, okay, Sam, what's your question? And then he could turn his microphone on and then ask his question, is a much better flow, as opposed to in a face-to-face classroom situation, or just turning your microphone on in a web conference and just saying, hey, I got a question, which can be very disruptive to the flow of class. So some of the icons some of the buttons that are available for expression within the participant window are raising your hand, as I just did, yes and no questions. And the other one is, which probably applies to me in this case because I tend to present really slow, I've received that feedback from time to time, is could you speed it up or could you slow it down? So those are a couple of the expressions that are available for you. So on the next slide, I'd like to ask everyone if they could find their hand raising. Oh, let's see what we got here. We have 13 people in. Let's see how many have raised their hand. Is everyone raising their hand now? I just want to check. Let's see. Got a couple of raised hands. I have an analog raised hand. You cannot, raising hand, but let me see how many of you are raising your hands here. It looks like we got a couple of people, but that's one way to, so the raised hands is probably the one way that the students can get your attention. So that's one. The second, which I'll go to, let me switch over here.
And John, can I jump in here real quick and ask a question that came in here? Do the settings include a way for a subtle beep or an audio cue when somebody raises their hand?
I actually don't. I don't think it does. Not so. There is a so the chime that goes off when somebody's entering a room, that type of sound, I don't think exists when you're doing the raised hands, unless it might be a setting that I haven't seen, but to my knowledge that's not. I don't see that. But the indication that I get as an instructor that I can see, even if the chat window is closed, is if your video is up, I can see a little blue hand come up in the upper left-hand corner of my screen up here. I can see on your screens a little blue hand that pops up to say that you have raised your hand to ask a question. So if you have your video up, that's another way to, there's no audio, but there is a visual way to see that someone has raised their hand. Any more questions before we go on?
So people are saying that they can't see how to raise their hand. Maybe we can go over that one more time. And then the question was, is there a way for the teacher to lower everyone's hands? So when you click on Manage Participants, you can see the action that individuals have taken. You
can see that. I think maybe why people aren't seeing the buttons themselves. If you do have, as you were saying, you have to put the Manage Participants button and click on that, and then it will show a little rectangle will come out from the side there, and it will show, who's raised their hands and who hasn't.
Keep in mind also that the way that appears will be different if you are the host as opposed to right now when you're the participant, because I have for example, since we're both the host of this meeting, I have a clear all button that can lower everyone's hand, which I just did for myself. But I don't have a raise hand button myself. I can just see the participants raising their hand. So there is slightly different views depending on whether or not you're hosting the meeting.
the other question that just popped up that maybe this might be throwing people off is during the presentation, sometimes the Option keys disappear. So you'll see them kind of, they'll lower and disappear to give you more screen room. To get those functions back, if you scroll your mouse over the screen, those features will come back, and one of those will be manage participants that'll allow you to click and bring up the screen that we've been talking about, that'll allow you to raise your hand or say, ask for me to speak louder. So I hope that helps, but that might be confusing some folks when they're trying to find these controls. I'm seeing a lot of feedback through chat that they might be having trouble with that. Any more questions so far? Okay, so I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide, and please, we will have time at the end of the presentation as well for you to come back with your questions. So please keep that in mind. So the other function or feature that you might see is yes and no. So if you ask a yes or no question, so in this case, do you want me to continue with the presentation? You can be honest. I won't get mad yet. Not yet, but if you want to say yes or no and click on that, I can get some immediate feedback on that. And so I got a couple of you responding to that, and to that, to the yes and no question there. So So as far as polling is concerned, this is the next kind of the next thing to look at. So one moment, I think my battery is going down. So let me stop real quick and make sure my plug is plugged in, because I don't think it is. So just 1 second. Okay, so my apologies. I'm sure others will relate. My 3-year-old son likes to pull plugs out and pulled out the plug from my laptop. So that's why the battery is going down. So that's a real life scenario, but let's continue with the presentation. My apologies on that. So we're going on to polling, and polling is another feature that's available within Zoom that will allow you, during different times during your class presentation, during your class, to be able to gauge the engagement of the students during the course of a 45 or 90-minute course. And so very often the structure is that you potentially put a poll at the beginning, asking how everyone is doing, just to kind of as an icebreaker to wake the students up, get them, on task. Ask them a poll in the middle of the presentation of your class saying, how's everyone doing? Are you okay? Are you understanding what's happening? And then at the end, having another poll that asks another question to see if everyone is, engaged throughout. So it's kind of there are mileposts within a lecture to make sure that everyone the students are staying with you throughout the course. So on your screens, you're not going to be able, so this is the instructor view, keep in mind, but on your screens, when you log in initially as a host of a meeting, you very well may not see the polling icon itself. And the reason is that the way that Zoom deals with creating polls is that you have to actually log into cornell.zoom.us, click on login, and then go into your own user profile to be able to create polls. And so if you're logging into your course and you're logging into your Zoom room and you don't necessarily see polling as a option, it's because you haven't created any polls yet within your own profile. So what I'm about to do now is I'll walk you through how to create a poll within your meeting. But just keep in mind, there's a very high likelihood that you will have to review this recording and go through it much slower, because there are a number of steps you have to go through. So it's not going to surprise me if you'll have to review this video or reach out to Sam or myself to have a review on this. So once you log into your Zoom, cornell.zoom.us profile, you're going to come up to this screen. And so on this screen, you're going to see tabs up at the top. One of them says previous meetings, upcoming meeting, previous meetings, or your personal meeting room. So in this case, upcoming meetings would be meetings that you scheduled in the future from your Zoom app and Canvas. Previous meetings are, meetings that have occurred in the past. And personal meetings is that personal meeting room that you always have available to you to distribute to students for office hours or for your own personal use if needed. So first we're going to go to previous meetings, and then you'll see the arrow that goes to rooms, which specifies the room that you're going to put the poll in. So you'll get to this page, and it's a little bit of a deeper view, but what you'll notice is that what you're looking for is actually not on this specific page. And just as a kind of a word of warning about Zoom, the feature that you most likely want to use is found by scrolling down the page. So if you don't find it immediately, the feature you're looking for, just scroll down and look, and you'll be able to find it. So as we scroll down the page, you're going to see a selection that's called add a poll, which is going to you'll be able to add your first poll. So you click on that, and then you get to a screen that looks like this. So just as a word of warning, some of the features, as I said earlier, some of the features that you need in Zoom are available by scrolling down. So in this case, I'm creating just a initial icebreaker question for the start of class that I'm going to show to everyone within the room. So the title for this poll is Icebreaker. I type in the question, and I click on single choice, which means that the student will only be capable of making one choice or one answer choice for the question. And so once you put this information in, you'll have to scroll down the screen, which I'll show you on the next slide. And when you scroll down the screen, you have the option to add more questions if you want to within the poll. If you click on delete, that's going to delete the one question that's above it. And then if you're ready to save the poll, you click save, which is available there at the bottom. Once you've created the poll, if you remember at the bottom of the page where it said add, and we were adding in multiple polls. So what I've done in this case with this Zoom room is I've created 3 different polls that I'm going to ask over the course of my next class. The first one being my icebreaker poll, just kind of get the students engaged and ready. The mid-class poll, which is to see how they're doing in the middle of the class, and then a final poll just to kind of close out the class and end. So I've already preset all of these polls within my room, and so I'm set to go to class and use these polls. So once I get into the room, this is the instructor view. Now what I'm going to see is down at the bottom of the screen, I'm going to see a selection for polling. And when I click on that, a screen is going to come up, another screen is going to come up just right in the middle that shows your polls. And so now that we know that now the polling tool is up, I'll show you what happens in the next screen. You have the option of selecting a poll that you want to launch to the students for them to see. So in that drop-down menu, you'll see that we have our icebreaker poll, our mid-class poll, and our final poll. So I want to bring up the icebreaker poll and launch that. So once I click on icebreaker, and then I go down to the bottom of the screen and I click on launch poll. Once I do that, a green bar comes up. It says the icebreaker poll is in progress, and you can start to see the answers come in based on who answers the poll within the room, and see the percentages of, okay, who feels good, who feels tired, who feels awful, and kind of gauge how your students are doing that day. And once you feel like you've gotten a good critical mass of answers, you can click on end poll at the bottom, and then it'll show the results initially only to you as the instructor. So you'll see the results first, kind of digest, in this case, how the students are feeling, and then you click on share results, and you can share it with the students. It also has an option, if you want, to give the poll again. I'm trying to think of a scenario for giving the poll again would be that students came in late. I don't know, for me, just sharing relaunching the poll may not be a feature that you use very often, but that feature is available to you if you need it. And so once that's been done, then basically those results are that you're sharing the poll results. And so this screen indicates that the poll results are being shared. Once you're done with the poll, you want to get back to instruction and move on. If you click on stop sharing, the button there, then it will stop the poll. You can move on to the next part of your lesson. So this is the other feature that I mentioned earlier, which is the whiteboard feature. And I'll have to preface this in saying it's hard to explain all parts of this tool because the instructor view is so different than what the participants are seeing. But I will try to go over each one of these features by clicking on it, using it, and then kind of naming out the feature to you and going through a demonstration that way. But I think as I said, it's probably better if you have a chance to use the tool and play with it. You'll get to see the view that I see and get to interact with it and use it, and get a better sense of what the tool can offer. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Go over here. And then I'm going to transition over. I'm going to go to the green arrow down at the bottom, and then I'm going to transition over to my whiteboard tool. So I'm selecting my whiteboard tool now. I'm sorry, I'm giving kind of a narrative of how I'm walking through this. So I'm selecting the whiteboard tool, and then I'm going down, and I'm going to be sharing. One moment. So everyone should see the white screen here. So I'm going to name out the features as I go through them so you get a sense of what the whiteboard feature can do. So if I click on text and I go down here, I can go ahead and type in text. If I go to the next feature, which is draw, I can go ahead and draw in text here. If I go to stamp, I can put checks in on different portions of the screen to kind of show that this is good. There's other options that are available, but this is kind of the stamp feature. If I click on Spotlight, it gives me the capability to use my mouse as a laser pointer. So I don't know if everyone sees that red dot that's going around the screen, but that's available to you. And then as a final feature, we have Erase, which will allow you to go through and erase anything on your screen.
John, the question here real quick was, are you drawing with your cursor or could you use an iPencil?
So I'm drawing with my cursor right now. If you do have a device like a Wacom slate, that's probably one. It's basically like a rectangular slate tool that you can use with a stylus to write. You can use that. The other option that's available, I haven't used this as much, but it's a possibility, is launching Zoom from your iPad and using, if you have the stylus, the iPencil, you can use that as a way to annotate, as a way to write on the whiteboard, using the whiteboard tool in Zoom. So there's other ways, there's other input devices that you can use for sure.
And another question is, can you write on the whiteboard before you begin your lesson and then save it to show later during the lesson?
I've only used it, I'll be honest, I've only used it spontaneously to write on the fly. There is a feature, and I just want to preface this because I haven't tried this feature to really recommend it as something you should do. But at the bottom right-hand portion of the screen, there is a button with a square with a plus that allows for you to create additional slides. So you can create a multi whiteboard presentation. I don't know if you can pre-make, I think the question is, I don't know if you can pre-make a whiteboard presentation and then have it available on Zoom to use.
So I think what the implication here would be is that you start your Zoom meeting early before students arrive, and you could potentially have that information up on the whiteboard. But then I don't think once you stop the meeting, you can save the whiteboard screen. But I'm also not sure if that, if you can pull it up again later to go through it. Mm-hmm. The question is, what would the pedagogical reasoning be behind preparing that? Why could you not do that, say, in a PowerPoint presentation and then pull up that slide and share your screen? I think that would be, depending on what you want to do, that could be an alternative. So if you have specific questions about that, maybe you can schedule a one-on-one with us.
So everyone, I think, has access to Office 365, and I think it's the version like 16. I'm not sure what the exact number is, but if you want to get, and I think this is what we actually had a conversation about this. Angelica and I had a conversation about this before the webinar today, that if you have used the annotation tools within, or the inking tools within PowerPoint, you can have a situation where you can pre-make those slides and then annotate over them. Because I actually think the whiteboarding tools, the annotating tools within PowerPoint would probably satisfy most of what faculty are looking for when it comes to a tool like this. So yeah, that is another option for sure.
And there was a question about whether students are able to write on the whiteboard. And I'm not sure, John, do you know if I know students are also able to share. Not everyone can contribute to the same whiteboard, but I believe that whiteboard is an option for anyone involved in the meeting if they have permission to share. So you could have students share a whiteboard. It just wouldn't be able to be the same whiteboard that you've already written on. It's not a group document.
Yeah, the other piece to mention about that is there is I'll be honest, I didn't want to show this feature because it is complicated for some folks to use and to implement, but there is a way that you can turn over the mouse to your students to then in turn go through an exercise where they would, I could imagine demonstrating the stroke order of a character. You could turn the mouse over to the students. They would demonstrate the stroke order of a character, and then the instructor during the presentation would then in turn give feedback on, oh, well, that's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, not 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. They could give that kind of feedback. I would definitely practice that before I would. It's definitely not a feature I would use spontaneously, but at least walk your students through how to do it, because it requires a lot of classroom management through Zoom that you need to get a certain comfort level with before you try to put it out there. So are there other questions before I go on? I just want to make sure before I move through this, we're almost at the end of the presentation, so I can get, we'll definitely have time for more questions, but if there are any pressing questions right now, I definitely can hear them, but if not, I'll keep going. All right, so let's go ahead and okay, so let's go back. So I think we've gone through most of these slides here. And then I'll go ahead and close with these final thoughts. So as I said earlier at the beginning, not better, just different, I think is a really good thing to keep saying to yourself as you go through the process of learning these tools, because I would be misrepresenting this by saying you'll jump on and you'll immediately get this and you'll be flying, you'll be just, off to the races. It takes practice and it takes time. So just have a sense of humor, be really good to yourself and say, I got this far today. Let's try it again and I'll get this far today. And, take it in small doses, because if you try to take the whole pie at once, it's just going to be, it'll be overwhelming and too much. So that's some of my kind of my words of wisdom on that, in that regard. The other one is use what makes sense. You've been teaching your language for a long time. You can look at these tools and say, I love what that does. I'm definitely using that. That feature over there is just, I don't get it. I'm not going to use that. It doesn't make sense in my language to use that. And as a teacher, you do have that ability and kind of the sense or your hunch that certain tools will work for you, certain tools won't, and still tune into those hunches to make decisions about which tools are going to work for you. Practice releases tension. That's the other thing I would say. So I'm a drummer. So just using a drummer's reference. So rudiments, rudiments are very precise and they're often very unorthodox, and you feel a lot of tension when you're trying to learn a new rudiment. But as you practice and as you practice those rudiments, it becomes smoother and there becomes less tension, and you're able to transition through these tools, very much easier than when the first time you tried them. So as you practice the tools, you'll feel less tension. You'll be able to switch very smoothly between them. You'll be able to adjust to unforeseen circumstances, like a 3-year-old that unplugged your laptop in the middle of your presentation. So you'll be able to adjust to those things as they come, because they will, those things are ultimately going to happen at some point. So I'll give a plug as usual to the COVID-19 preparedness page that we have available for everyone to reference, with some great documentation and tips and other information on how to teach in the virtual instruction environment. Here is also, if you need to contact any member of the team, here is the About Us page that you can reference to find our contact information. Here is my contact information if you need to get in touch with me. And then finally, I wouldn't be finishing a Ferris Bueller themed webinar without saying we need to save him. So I'll leave with that, and then I'll open the floor up to any questions that you have.
John, thank you so much for this informative and humorous presentation. I think we need humor right now as much as we can have it. I just want to reiterate what John just said about our preparedness page. We do update this multiple times a day, so keep checking back. We're adding new topics for webinars, new times. We're also updating our FAQ section. So do bookmark that page and keep referencing it. All the information of the webinar, the slides and the recordings, they always go up shortly after we're done. Quick plug for tomorrow's webinar. That will be at 3:30 tomorrow on Thursday, and we will talk about when to go to prom with me, engaging students in the virtual environment. So we will talk about some strategies of what you can do to replicate what you would do in your face-to-face classes, piggybacking on what John started out talking about today. So if you have any questions, now is the time. I see Frances raised her hand. Would you like to ask a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. My question, I just received a message saying many courses on Canvas are not published. I'm very confused. We are using Canvas. I've been using this for several semesters. And why there is a message saying the courses are not published?
Do you know who sent that message? Was that a message?
From my department, and the department got it from...
Okay.
Yeah.
So probably what that means is that there are a number of your colleagues. So when we transitioned to Canvas, Canvas is a little bit differently set up than Blackboard was. With Blackboard, you had to request that your course was added and activated. In Canvas, every class that's listed in the class roster automatically receives a section in Canvas. But then sometimes some faculty members decide not to use it because they have established other communication channels. And so that means by default, anything that's in Canvas is unpublished. So if you already have been using Canvas, you don't have to worry about any of that.
Okay.
That just refers to when you go into Canvas, when you get ready at the beginning of every semester, remember how you have to enable that little publish, unpublish button in the top right corner of your Canvas.
Yeah.
So there are a number of people in Asian studies who simply haven't used their section. And so the Center for Teaching Innovation can see which classes haven't been published already. So if you've already been using Canvas, don't even worry about it.
Okay, thank you.
You know what you're doing, so just keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I think this could be a reminder for everybody if you are using Canvas. I've done this so many times. I'm finishing my course, I'm ready for the first day of classes. And then I get upset at my students because nobody is doing the assignment in the discussion forum. And I'm like, why are you guys not online? Well, it's because I forgot to publish the course, right? So unless you publish it, the students won't be able to see it. So just double check your settings and make sure that that little button on the top actually says publish and has a little green radio button.
Thank you.
I see Naomi was asking if they're permitted to practice using Zoom with their students. And I believe we talked about that a little yesterday, right? That is, as long as it's not a mandatory session, that's an option.
Correct, yes. And if you are interested in practicing yourself being the instructor, our student assistants are on standby. So if you are interested in scheduling a time for a mock teaching session, please email us. We can arrange that for you. It is tricky to request your students to actually join live right now because, again, classes are suspended. So you can certainly tell your students that you will be available on Monday, Wednesday, Friday from whatever time to whatever time, or on one specific day during one specific time. That is a possibility, but it should not be mandatory. And you also cannot assume that on the first day of actual teaching after April 6th, that you don't have to go over everything again. I think we've been stressing this during every webinar. The first time you connect with your students on Zoom, make sure you don't even teach anything. Check in with them, make sure they're all mentally okay, that they're in a physical space that's conducive to learning online, go over some best practices for using microphones, for lighting, and then just walk through Zoom, walk through Canvas, practice hand-raising, polling, whiteboard, do all that stuff. And then once students have seen the online environment, I think then you can dive back into teaching. That would be our recommendation here. Other questions? Okay. Well, John, thanks again.
Sure.
Thank you everybody for joining us today, for participating. Tomorrow, 3:30, we'll talk about engaging students in a distance environment. And again, if you have any other questions, email us, sign up for a one-on-one slot, join us during drop-in hours. You know who we are, where we are, and how to get a hold of us. So please do take advantage of us if you do have any questions. So keep up the good work, remember to breathe, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Great.
Bye, everybody.